Emeka was a man blessed with not only wealth, but an abundant spirit of generosity. He was known throughout his community as a brilliant businessman. He had achieved a remarkable level of success, earning the respect and admiration of those around him. His ventures in importing and selling industrial machines had flourished, allowing him to enjoy a life filled with opulence and comfort. However, his wealth was not his alone to enjoy. Emeka was known for his charitable heart. He had extended a helping hand to many struggling young men, lifting them out of poverty and setting them on paths to success. Through his guidance and generosity, he had turned lives around, making him not just wealthy, but beloved. But all this changed one morning, though in a way he could never have foreseen. Emeka, waking up with gratitude for another day, reached over for his phone. He was in the habit of keeping his phone on silent at night, valuing his sleep over the constant buzz of notifications. To his surprise, he found 20 missed calls from a particular number, a number that belonged to one of his employees who helped manage his business affairs. The sheer number of missed calls sent a wave of dread through him. With a racing heart, he dialed back, and as the line connected, the news on the other end of the call changed his life forever. "Hello, sir." His employee's panicked voice came through, barely holding back tears. "I've been trying to reach you since morning. All the containers carrying your goods are falling into the sea." "What?" Emeka's voice cracked, his mind reeling. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. Those containers held industrial machines worth hundreds of millions, the backbone of his business. As the man on the other end of the line tried to explain further, Emeka's mind went numb. The magnitude of his loss sinking in, his thoughts swelled, imagining the containers he had painstakingly invested in, now swallowed by the sea. Before he could process anything further, the world around him faded to black, and he collapsed. When Nkechi, his wife, entered the room later to check on him to know if he was awake and ready for breakfast, she found Emeka lying lifelessly on the floor. Her heart dropped as she screamed, frantically shaking him. After rushing him to the hospital, she anxiously waited, praying that he would survive. The doctors, after examining him, confirmed that he had collapsed from severe shock. Severe shock? What shock could that be? Out of curiosity, Nkechi hurried back home to check his phone and discover the source of this unsettling news. Once home, she scrolled through his call logs, noticing the last dialed number. She decided to call it back, and upon hearing the news, Nkechi was struck with the same devastating shock, breaking down in bitter tears. Emeka remained in intensive care for some days before finally being discharged. Once discharged from the hospital, Emeka returned home, a shadow of his former self. The shock had rattled him deeply, and as the days passed, he drifted into a state of depression. Unable to think of a way to revive his business, he often sat in silence, his mind plagued by despair. The vibrant, generous businessman that everyone knew had vanished, replaced by a man whose spirit was weighed down by the memories of his lost fortune. Just as they were beginning to adjust to their new reality, another blow struck. They received a call from David's school. David was their only son. He was born after 15 long years of waiting and prayers. And now, David had suddenly fallen ill. Emeka and Nkechi's heart froze. They had endured so much to finally have David, and now he was sick with an unidentifiable illness. Racing to his school, they took him to the hospital, hoping that a doctor would be able to diagnose and treat him. But after countless tests, treatments, and consultations, David's condition remained a mystery. Not a single doctor could identify the cause of his symptoms, and each hospital visited drained them both emotionally and financially. Emeka and Nkechi found themselves moving David from one hospital to another, their desperation growing as each new attempt failed to yield answers. The family's resources dwindled as they sold properties to afford his treatment, eventually flying him abroad in a last, expensive attempt to save him. But David's health continued to deteriorate, casting fear and helplessness over Emeka and Nkechi. As their wealth evaporated, so did their hope. Every penny they had saved, every property they had worked for, had been spent in a futile search for a cure. Emeka and Nkechi, once pillars of strength and prosperity, were reduced to poverty, with nothing left to sell except the house they lived in and their last car. They could no longer afford to chase false promises of treatment. One night, broken by their losses and the sight of her son's suffering, Nkechi entered David's room, watching him lie weak and pale. Hardly able to move or speak, unable to bear the sight, she broke down, her tears falling like rain. In a moment of raw desperation, she sank to her knees and prayed, surrendering David's life to God. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "I waited 15 years for this child. I have gone to men for help, but now I return to you. Please, in your mercy, heal him." She lingered there in silence, pouring out her heart. To her astonishment, when she returned the next morning, she found David sitting up, his eyes open, looking healthier than he had in months. "This is nothing but a miracle," Nkechi screamed out loud, giving glory to God. Within 3 days, David's health was completely restored, and the miracle of his recovery left Nkechi and Emeka rejoicing. Despite their newfound poverty, their spirits were lifted as they watched David return to his normal self, heading back to school as though nothing had happened. With David restored, Emeka tried to rebuild their lives. He reached out to old friends and former business associates, hoping they might lend him a hand as he had done for so many in the past. But each door he knocked on was firmly closed in his face. Those he had helped build their businesses, those he had generously supported, now turned him away with hollow excuses. Once, he had been the man everyone admired, the friend everyone relied on. Now, he found himself a beggar, desperate for a helping hand but met with cold indifference. Nkechi, who witnessed each rejection, was heartbroken by the cruelty of the people they had once considered family. Their last home and car were sold just to buy food and make a final attempt at a small business, but the venture failed within months. They struggled for their daily bread, and Nkechi couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. How could they all turn their backs on us at once? She pondered aloud, wondering if there was something deeper at work. Nkechi's suspicions grew with each passing day, and one night, she dreamed of Emeka in his wealthy days, hurrying off to his village. In the dream, she pleaded with him not to go, sensing danger, but he seemed unaware, almost obsessed with the journey to his village. The dream left her shaken, and as it repeated night after night, she grew convinced that there was a hidden force behind their misfortune. Desperate for answers, Nkechi prayed for divine guidance, and one Sunday morning, she dressed up and prayed solemnly to God, asking for direction on the church to attend. She left home without knowing where she was headed. She wandered the streets, muttering quiet prayers, until after about 1 hour of walking past several churches, she got to a church and heard a voice behind her saying she should enter and fellowship with them. A feeling of peace washed over her as she stood in front of the church. Without hesitation, she entered, sitting through a service that seemed to speak directly to her heart. The sermon was like balm to her soul, and she felt peace with a renewed hope. After the service, Nkechi felt an intense urge to meet the pastor for prayers, but obstacles stood in her way. The protocol to see the pastor was demanding, and she was told to return on Friday during counseling hours if she wanted to meet with him. However, Nkechi felt a strong conviction to see him that very day, and refused to leave. She quietly prayed, asking God to intervene and make a way. After several minutes of waiting, to her surprise, the pastor emerged from his office and upon seeing her, immediately called her in. Once inside, the pastor prayed fervently for her, and after a few minutes of intense prayer, he gently sat her down and asked, "Where is your husband, woman?" "He's at home, sir," she replied. "Could he come with you to see me?" "Yes, sir, I will speak to him," Nkechi promised. The pastor then scheduled an appointment for them to return on Friday morning. When Nkechi got home, she told her husband about the pastor's invitation, but Emeka wasn't interested. He had been taken advantage of by several pastors and prophets in the past during his times of misfortune, which had left him disillusioned and distrustful of anything related to church or its leaders. Still, Nkechi pleaded with him nearly every day, hoping he would change his mind. Finally, the appointed day arrived, but Emeka remained adamant. Nkechi knelt down, begging him one last time, but he refused. Frustrated, Nkechi decided to go alone. Just as she was about to leave, Emeka had a change of heart. He called out for her to wait, quickly changed his clothes, and joined her. When they arrived, the pastor welcomed them and began with a short prayer, asking that their eyes of understanding be opened so they could see and comprehend the message God had for them. After the prayer, the pastor turned to Emeka and asked about his father and the last time they had seen each other. The pastor then began to reveal shocking truths about the source of their misfortune, exposing hidden struggles that left Emeka and Nkechi speechless. According to the pastor's revelation, which Emeka confirmed as accurate, Emeka recalled a peculiar incident. One morning, he had received a call from his father, urgently instructing him to come to the village immediately. Without question, Emeka prepared to leave, despite Nkechi's confusion and pleas for him to reconsider the sudden, unplanned journey. Yet, he felt an irresistible pull, compelled by his father's voice. Upon reaching the village, Emeka's father took him into a room filled with symbols of dark rituals. There, his father cut his fingernails, toenails, and hair, even removed a few of his eyelashes, placing each piece into a calabash before sending Emeka home. Yet, when Emeka returned to the city, he had no recollection of any of these events. His memory had been wiped clean, leaving him unaware of the dark rituals performed. It was only after the pastor's prayer and detailed recounting that Emeka's memory returned, revealing every disturbing detail. He realized that it was shortly after that visit that his business collapsed and a series of misfortunes followed. Nkechi and Emeka were shaken by the depth of this revelation. Nkechi, with tears streaming down her face, cried out, "How could he, your own father, whom you loved so much, did this to you? How? He brought you from grace to grass, but why?" The pastor then suggested a journey to Emeka's village the next day to confront his father and seek an explanation. The next day, they drove down to the village. As they arrived, Emeka's father spotted him from afar and hurried over to embrace him, visibly pleased to see his son in a destitute state. He invited them to come inside, but the pastor intervened, cautioning them against entering the house if they valued their lives. The pastor began to pray fervently, then confronted Emeka's father, asking why he had ruined his own son's life and reduced him to poverty. Under the power of the pastor's prayers, Emeka's father began to confess. He admitted that he had grown envious as he watched Emeka become the most successful of his children, on the verge of achieving great wealth. Fearing that Emeka would outshine him and become too powerful, he decided to put a stop to his progress. He confessed to orchestrating Emeka's downfall, ensuring he lost his business and endured hardship. Emeka's father had 2 wives who bore him 4 children. Emeka was the first and only child of his second wife, whom he had married after many years of his first wife's barrenness. Only after Emeka's birth did his first wife conceive, giving birth to 3 children. Emeka's father had always loved his first wife and her children more deeply, while viewing Emeka and his mother with disdain. Seeing Emeka, the son of his second wife, rise to wealth and prominence stirred feelings of resentment. In his jealousy, he resorted to dark means to bring Emeka down. I made him lose his business. I made his only son fall ill just to drain his money, and I turned people's hearts against him so no one would help him, he admitted. Hearing his father's confession, Emeka was devastated. He couldn't fathom that the man he loved and trusted had been the cause of his suffering all along. Tears streamed down his face as he recalled his late mother's warning to be cautious of his father and to keep his distance. But Emeka had longed for a father figure in his life and couldn't bring himself to heed her words. He had remained close to his father, showering him with wealth when he was prosperous, never suspecting that his closest bond was, in fact, his greatest enemy. Emeka wept bitterly, mourning not only his misfortunes, but also the betrayal that had shattered his trust. Back in the pastor's office, Emeka and Nkechi sat in stunned silence. The weight of his father's betrayal lingered heavily in Emeka's heart. How could a man he had loved so deeply, a man he had supported financially, be the architect of his suffering? But as painful as the revelation was, Emeka realized he had a choice: to remain in bitterness or to seek a new path, free from his father's influence. With the pastor's guidance, he decided on the latter. The pastor led them in fervent prayers, asking for divine restoration and a breaking of the dark spiritual bond between Emeka and his father. After several hours of prayer, the pastor placed a comforting hand on Emeka's shoulder. I believe the curse has been lifted, he said. From here, you must walk a path of forgiveness, faith, and trust in God's plan for your life. Emeka returned home with renewed hope. Though life had taken nearly everything from him, he now had a glimmer of possibility for a future without fear. He began attending church regularly, rekindling a faith he had nearly lost amid his suffering. Each day, Emeka felt a gradual lightness, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Only a few weeks later, as Emeka continued to rebuild his faith and perspective, he received an unexpected call. It was a company he had once worked with in his more prosperous days, offering him a new contract. The proposal was enormous, involving machinery worth hundreds of millions. Emeka's heart pounded as he spoke to the company representative. His thoughts racing. How would he afford the startup cost with no savings or credit to his name? Just as Emeka was thinking about his lack of capital, but before he could voice his concerns, the caller mentioned they were willing to pay the full amount upfront. We believe in your past work and your expertise, Mr. Emeka. We are prepared to pay the full amount upfront. If you accept, we can get started right away. Emeka nearly dropped the phone. It felt like a miracle. Nothing like this had ever happened in his business before. Typically, buyers paid only upon receiving their orders. Overwhelmed with gratitude and wonder, he quickly accepted the terms. He closed the call and stood there in silence, realizing that his life was taking a turn he hadn't dared to hope for. Carefully and strategically, he began investing in new machinery, setting up meetings with partners, and organizing shipments. Every decision he made was cautious. Having learned from the trials he had endured, slowly but steadily, Emeka's business began to rise once again. After he rebuilt his fortune, Emeka did not forget the lessons his hardship had taught him. He held his family close, spending precious time with Nkechi and David, grateful for their love and resilience. His generosity towards others remained, but he became more discerning, learning to offer help where it was genuinely needed rather than where it might be exploited. In the months that followed, Emeka's wealth was restored. and his family struggles became a distant memory. News of his success spread through the city, surprising those who had once turned their backs on him. Many tried to reconnect, hoping to rekindle the friendship they had severed. But Emeka remained cautious, choosing to rebuild his social cycle with care and integrity. As Emeka looked out over the thriving business he had rebuilt, he was filled with gratitude. He had lost everything but gained a new understanding of strength, family, and faith. His journey had not been easy, but it had led him to a life richer and more meaningful than he had ever known. Have you heard a similar story in your place? Let me know in the comment section. If you like the story, you will love the next video. Click to watch now. Goodbye.